Back in the day, most car companies would make a single car in multiple flavors. They would start with a sedan, move on to a coupe, maybe a station wagon, definitely a convertible. Then they'd do the whole exercise again by dropping a higher performance engine in each flavor. Sadly, this practice ended in the 80s, got worse in the 90s where they killed off station wagons in favor of SUVs and crossovers. Fast forward to today, and it's really only German car manufacturers doing this party trick. And really, over the past year or so, you and I have been sampling many flavors of the BMW 8 series, which brings us to today and yet another flavor. This time full fat underneath the hood, 2 extra doors, and the longest body. As of late, you and I have been spending a lot of time with this engine, but still a recap, 4.4-liter twin-turbo V8 that is good for 617 horsepower. I always giggle when the first number is 6. Comes in at 6,000 RPM, and the torque 553 pound-feet. Comes in at 1,800 RPM, stays flat all the way up to 5,860 RPM. If it was not a competition, it would be 600 horsepower. Transmission, anything you want, as long as it's an 8-speed torque converter automatic. Now, performance figures, you would think they would be very good considering a vehicle with that engine, but keep in mind, this is the better part of 4,500 pounds, but 0 to 60 anyway is 3 seconds. If it was not the competition, it would be much slower, 3.1 seconds to 60, and the VMAX is electronically limited in both to 155 miles an hour. However, there is a package that we will learn about in the options game that reprograms the ECU and frees this entire vehicle, as well as that engine, to go 190 miles an hour. 2 rather important points, the first being the weight differential between this and the coupe we've already driven. It's just shy of 200 pounds heavier, which brings up the second point. That's total, about 5%, just below 5% of the overall weight of this vehicle. With that. Oh no, does not seem to make a difference at all. Oh my God. We already knew that anything with this engine is laughably fast. It's like almost explosive in the way it delivers power. But now let's you and I downshift both literally and figuratively and talk about that roof. There is a carbon fiber panel fitted up there. The logic is to lower the overall weight, but more importantly, lower the center of gravity of that weight. Now I get that in, say, a 992 or lower than that. So that's what, a 3,300 pound car, maybe a 2,800 pound car, I get that. But this, it's almost 4,500 pounds. So, not to be too pedantic here, but can we put a glass sunroof in this thing? It's not going to make a huge difference for a large sedan that has over 600 horsepower. If the folks at Petelring 130 could sort that out for me, I'd be greatly appreciative. Vielen Dank. As of this filming, you and I have shot 4 separate episodes of varying flavors of BMW 8 Series, so suffice to say we have covered in gory detail the double wishbone in the front, multi-link in the rear suspension. Yet here, there are some finer points we need to focus on. Let's start with the wheels. They are still 20 inches in diameter, but this being a competition, it is a specific wheel design to the competition. Then there are the brakes. If these were steel rotors, 395 mils in the front, 380 in the back. But in fact, they are not steel rotors, they are carbon ceramic, which means 400 mils in the front, 380 in the back, and 6 piston calipers in the front. And this is one of the very rare instances where I would suggest carbon ceramic rotors, because this thing, it is so much power coming from the engine, you do need the better brakes, which are optional. And then moving to the rear, you may remember in the 840 Gran Coupe episode, there was a wider track. That makes the jump to the M8 version of the Gran Coupe. In addition to that, there's more bracing in the rear, and I would argue it's more important in this M8 than the 2-door M8 because of the extra length of the vehicle. Now we press on to all those adjustments that full-fat BMW M cars are famous for. That hasn't changed here. What has changed is how you control those adjustments. So yes, they still have those programmable buttons on the steering wheel, the M buttons. There are 2 of them. However, on the console, instead of having like a toggle switch or 3 different buttons, there is a single button that takes you to a menu in the screen that's almost like a spreadsheet where you can go through and change the steering, the throttle mapping, the suspension mapping, all that stuff independent of each other. As an aside, and as a pilot, I kind of dig all the manual adjustability that works in conjunction with the programmable buttons. But you know what? I'm going to turn this around to you. Which do you guys prefer, the single button or all the manual adjustability? And then last but not least, BMW, they're not fooling around. They think this is a track car, 4,500 pound track car, but it's a track car. And as such, there's not one, but two separate water circuits to cool the engine, and then a separate transmission cooler and a separate engine oil cooler. A couple more important figures. The wheelbase of this vehicle is just a shade under 8 inches longer, and the overall length is just a shade over 9 inches longer. I don't know about you guys, but I am intrigued as to how that impacts the driving dynamics, and thus far I have to say, there seems to be an improvement, exactly the opposite of what I expected. When you had a lot of weight and length, you would think this would be a harder vehicle to push around corners like this. If you remember the M8 Coupe, which we drove on the track, I felt that there was too much power for the platform, and the better pairing was the M850 with less horsepower. Not the case here. I would argue more horsepower, more length, more wheelbase, all good. Yes, it is indeed that time again to play your favorite game, Mind the Options game, with today's contestant. One of the fanciest BMW 8 Series you and I have ever driven together, the 2021 BMW M8 Gran Coupe, for a base price of built-in $130,000. Now we do need to pause for the color, because as a car guy who used to live in the UK, man oh man, the folks in Munich, they're after my own heart with this one. Brands Hatch Gray Metallic, and the interior, which is full merino leather, is Silverstone. Now, I don't like gray, but I would consider this color just for the name alone. To that, we had the competition package, which is the special wheels, the extra horsepower, the seat belts that have the M logo on it. The sport exhaust makes a huge difference here, as well as the M view in the dash. Some other items for $13,000. To that, we add the driver's assistance package, which is all the safety doodads like the lane keep assist, the blind spot warning, the park distance control, the rear cross traffic alert, that kind of stuff, $1,100. Now, if that's not enough driver's assist for you, there's a second driver's assist package, this one called the Professional, which translates to active cruise control with a stop and go feature. No, it is not a self-driving car, but what it is a stop and go feature. It'll even come to a stop and stay stopped for up to 30 seconds, $1,700. Then there's those carbon ceramic rotors, which I do suggest in this car, and I rarely do, $8,150. Then the M driver's package, most importantly, this ups the top speed to 190 miles an hour, $2,500. Then something I really wouldn't do, the carbon exterior package, $5,500. Then something you must do, the Bowers & Wilkins Diamond Surround System. They are adding fancy names to these stereo systems, but the price actually is somewhat cheaper than we've seen in Mercedes and Porsches and Audis as of late, $3,400. Then, of course, the EPA wants their pound of flesh because you bought yourself a 617 horsepower car. Gas guzzler tax for $1,000. Destination and handling, $995, for a total retail price of $167,245. It's not very often you and I have the opportunity in these very powerful, very fancy, and rather expensive German sedans to lop off the torque to the front wheels. And after all, this is a much prettier M5. So with that, I have programmed in that eventuality, and we are now, actually, no, we are not. So let me hit this twice. We are now in two-wheel drive. So with that, let's try it with the power only to the rear wheels. Oh my God! The rear end came out just a little bit there. You got this squeal. It's a little bit more aggressive. Now keep in mind, stability control is off, so you are taking a bigger risk with your rather expensive vehicle. But the first thing you notice, man, the steering changes. We learned that in the M5 and even in the E63S wagon. But here with the extra length and the extra wheelbase, I would argue it becomes more of a missile. It's more where you can point and go. Now, why is it more noticeable here? Well, that's an old luxury car trick we've learned in S-classes and 7 Series over the years, where you add wheelbase and length, that improves ride quality. But here, there's a lot of work done to the dampers, which control pitch, squat, dive, and roll. So then once you take the torque away from the front wheels, all you're doing is isolating the steering and realizing, oh my God, the steering in the vehicle is actually better than I thought. Add on top of that the better ride quality, and that's why this, I would argue, in terms of overall driving dynamics and two-wheel drive mode, is better than the M5. So let's take stock. You and I have driven the coupe flavor of both the M850 as well as the M8, then the M850 convertible, that was special, then the Gran Coupe, but the one with the inline 6-cylinder. And what we learned there, the 8 Series platform is better when it's longer and has 2 extra doors. What's changed today is the 840 is no longer my favorite. Absolutely this one. The bonkers amount of power in this longer car with the carbon ceramic rotors. It's just a more attractive vehicle and it's crazy fast. I'm still struggling with 170 grand because you're bumping up against a faster Porsche Panamera Turbo S that we recently drove. But this, it's just so pretty, which is rare for BMWs nowadays. May I make a suggestion back to Munich? Perhaps not $170,000 cars that have 600 horsepower, but let's do more attractive cars like this. And oh, while we're at it and I'm being greedy, if we're gonna continue all those different flavors, how about an 8 Series station wagon?